correct? So when you do bulk RNA-seq, you're essentially taking an average transcriptome profile of that particular organ. So you don't know for sure which gene is associated with what. Sorry, just give me a break for a minute.
Hello everyone. Tell that if you have any questions, kindly type on the chat.
Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, so you're taking an average profile of your organ, right? So you don't know which gene is associated with what kind of cell type. What single cell helps you to do is it allows you to profile individual cells. So you know exactly the transcriptome profile of a particular cell. Now, this has helped us in brain because brain is a very heterogeneous organ. It is made up of a lot of different cell types. So single cell transcriptomics actually helps us in the field of cancer because we know exactly what kind of cell type we want to target during therapy, at least in brain. Also, when you talk about brain tumors, they are very cell specific. So you have oligodendrogliomas, which are basically ancestrally having oligocytes as their ancestors, whereas you have astrocytomas, which have astrocytes as their ancestors. So in order to know what kind of a tumor it is, you need to know the cellular profile of the organ, right? So that's where single cell RNA-seq is really helpful because it gives you the cellular profile of your transcriptome rather than a average bulk profile of your tissue. So in the recent advances, single cell profiles have worked much better in transcriptomics compared to bulk. Okay. So the basic, like I said, the basic difference is when you take a bulk tissue, you get an average expression profile. So you don't know what the drug is going to target or what part of the disease is the drug going to target. Whereas in the single cell profile, we can segregate the cell types. We have oligodendrocytes differently, astrocytes differently, the immune cells differently. So we know precisely you can give a multi-drug therapy which will go and individually attack a specific cell type. So we have a drug only for astrocytes, we have a drug only for the macrophages, or you have a drug only for oligodendrocytes. So that's how single cell RNA-seq is going to help us compared to the bulk one. Moving on to proteomics. Now, proteomics is a huge field. Uh, and given that your end product matters the most, a lot of focus is given to proteomics, right? And a larger chunk of it being the structural proteomics. Now, proteomics essentially has 6 different fields. The first one being protein quantification. Then you have protein-protein interactions because protein-protein interactions help a lot with cell signaling in your data. So suppose you target a particular protein, but that protein might just be an intermediate between the entire cell signaling process. So targeting the intermediate agent is not going to take you anywhere. So protein-protein analysis basically allows you to look at the entire network or the whole cascade that is happening in cell signaling and allows you to target the entire cascade rather than targeting a middle agent. In functional proteomics, you have protein engineering or disease mutation. So you take the mutational profiles of your proteins or the proteome and study that. Functional proteomics also allows you to get into network analysis as well, as in have a particular function. So say in case of cancer, the main function that you want to target is proliferation, right? Because the more the cells proliferate, the more the cells divide, the more the cancer is going to grow, correct? So you want to target the functional profiles of proteins which help in proliferation. So that's where functional proteomics comes into place. Now, post-transcriptional modifications play an important role in cell signaling, right? Or even adhesion as a function. Adhesion is mostly a result of post-transcriptional modifications. So again, that particular aspect of proteomics is extensively studied for people who are looking into cell-cell interactions. Then you have structural proteomics, because again, most of the proteins go through 3D conformational changes to perform a particular function, or to allow cell-cell signaling. 1 minute. Yeah, or to allow cell-cell signaling. Then you have protein mining, wherein you actually extract sequences which are of your target identification, or you do protein profiling. Lastly is protein quantification. Now, the main arena of healthcare is protein identification, because a lot of diagnostic tests that happen are actually trying to quantify the protein levels in your blood and helping you with diagnosis. So anybody who's interested in getting into healthcare or getting into diagnostic labs, protein quantification plays an integral part there. So one of the major aspects of protein quantification is disease diagnosis. Now, we've looked at all these omics individually, but when you want to tackle diseases, especially a disease like cancer, you cannot rely on a single omic to get you the solution, right? So that's where you take into consideration the multi-omic aspect. So you take your proteome, your transcriptome, your genome, epigenome, and you look at the whole disease from different perspectives to come to a solution. You integrate multiple data sets to come to a particular hypothesis or to come to a particular solution to understand the disease. So currently, very few people are working with multi-omic data sets, or very few people can analyze multi-omic data sets. So having that credential on your profile is going to help a lot of you if you can actually analyze multi-omic data sets, because a lot of labs are particularly looking to do this rather than focusing on any one particular omic. Okay. Then this is the fun part of bioinformatics, I feel, is visualization. Okay. So when you take your data to a biologist, or to say a doctor, to a clinician, to a surgeon, anybody who's not very technologically sound, it is difficult to help them understand your data. It is difficult to help them see the nuances of your data, right? That's when the visualization comes into picture. So you put your data into different charts rather than just showing them the data. You put the data into different charts, which will allow them to actually visualize what's happening, allow them to actually see, hey, this is what is changing, or hey, that is the discrepancy in your data. So I feel the most fun part of bioinformatics is data visualization. Now, one such example is a heat map. Okay, over here the representative heat map has, imagine samples as your columns and genes as your rows. Now each square over here will tell you the gene expression in that particular sample of that particular gene. So now you know, say you have 10 healthy patients and 10 diseased patients. You can actually see, hey, these are the genes which are dysregulated in diseased patients compared to healthy patients. So one of the best interactive ways visualize this data is a heat map. Now, when you look at single cell data, right? One of the techniques that we always use, because single cell data is generated in millions and millions of cells, right? You cannot have a single cell data which has only 10 cells or 20 cells. It's always in millions. So one of the techniques to visualize the whole data set is the scatter plot or the TSNE plot that you have. Now over here, if you see, millions and millions of cells clubbed together to form a small hub or a small subgroup of its own, which is also known as a cluster. So when you want to show what is the exact cellular profile of your data, you use TSNE plots, which allow you to actually see what all cells are present in your data. In this case, I have taken human PBMCs, right? And I have annotated each cluster. So the red ones are my monocytes. Then I have NK cells, I have platelets, then I have memory cells and naive memory B cells and so on. So this is a very nice way to visualize big data sets, right? So these are the small two techniques. Now, you can, one of the things I always advise students is you have to know both these programming languages, one being Python and one being R. Now, R is more of a statistical programming language rather than a developing or an algorithm development one. If you want to develop an algorithm, you would, or a website or some web application, always go for Python, always. If you want to just visualize your data or perform some sort of statistical tests on your data, right, then you go for R. Always remember, if your data is really big, R is very computationally exhaustive. It does not work well with large scale data sets. So Python, on the other hand, works really well with large scale data sets. It's not computationally exhaustive. So always learn both these programming languages. Always see to it that you have efficiency in both these programming languages. One more thing about Python you may want to know is, I don't think they are doing it anymore, but in the earlier versions of Python, there was a lot of syntactical differences. So every time they upgraded the version of Python, they also changed the entire syntax structure of the script. I don't think they are doing it anymore, but that is something you may want to consider. Okay, next we move on to machine learning and artificial intelligence. Now, a lot of people don't get the difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence. So if you look at artificial intelligence as a whole globe, machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence and deep learning is a subset of artificial intelligence, right? So what artificial intelligence essentially does is it makes a computer system train like a human system or a human mind, right? It trains or helps the computer to mimic human intelligence or to make decisions like humans. Whereas machine learning allows the computer to learn from the existing data and give more accurate results. So that's the basic difference between AI and machine learning. Okay. So for machine learning, you always have to provide some sort of training data to the system or to the algorithm for it to analyze or test out different data sets. So the basic experimental design is you take any data, you divide the data into training data set and testing data set. You train your computer or you train the model using your training data set. Okay. And then you test out and then you test out the model on your test data. So that's how machine learning helps. Now, one practical example of machine learning is classification of brain tumors. So brain tumors are basically classified into two types. One is IDH mutated, one is IDH wild type. Now IDH mutated is essentially, IDH is a gene again, which is either mutated or not mutated. Now what machine learning, what they have developed is they have trained the machine to find which tumors are mutated and which are not based on the MRI images. So they took data from 1,000 patients, took 300 patients as their test data. They manually annotated if that particular MRI is of a mutated patient or a wild type patient. That's how they trained the data, right? So every time a new image came out of 300, they manually told the data machine, hey, this is a mutated image, this is a wild type image, right? Using the 300 annotated data sets, they applied that particular model to the remaining 700 MRI images, and they were able to get accuracy of 79.2%, which is considered to be a very high accuracy. So instead of now a patient going manually to a clinician or to a surgeon with their reports, they can just use the algorithm and find out if their particular tumor is wild type or mutated. So the whole concept of machine learning is eliminating the dependency on manual labor, right? So they are trying to eliminate, because with manual labor it also comes a lot of economical liabilities. Apart from economical liabilities, the major concern is the manual error because no matter how much you try, humans are prone to error. So the whole concept of machine learning is going to stem from the fact that they want to reduce the dependency on manual labor. Now, algorithms, I've used this term loosely across the presentation or the workshop, but basically algorithm is a series of steps which will help you to solve a particular problem. Now, a bioinformatician can develop algorithms if he wants to or she wants to, but they can completely go into analytics. So again, bioinformatics has different profiles. One can be of an algorithm developer. So in order to develop algorithms, you need to have good hold over Python. Now, so essentially a lot of open source tools are there which are already published or already in companies and research labs. The main area of focus is optimizing these scripts, because like I said, Top Hat takes like hours to work, right? Whereas HiSat works on couple of minutes. So that's an optimization problem. What HiSat people have done is just optimized the code for Top Hat, right? So algorithms can be an optimizing algorithm wherein you take an existing code and just optimize it or make it computationally less exhaustive. Secondly, you can also see to sort out or to find solutions to existing problems where the solutions are not present. So in case of clustering, right? Clustering is a huge problem from day one. Given that clustering is a very dynamic method, it is difficult to cluster your data because every time you try to cluster your data, it will give you different results, given that it's a very heuristic algorithm. So again, that is something as a you can put in as a hard task, wherein you try to solve that problem, but using different techniques. So that is where algorithm development area is right now. Then basically a skill set of a bioinformatician can be included in this triangle. The first one and the most important one being biology and medicine. You need to have a good hold over molecular biology and cellular biology, because that is the only thing that is going to give you an advantage over people from computer science or over people from IT, right? Because even a software engineer can code, right? Your basic upper hand comes from the fact that you know biology as well as coding. The second one being you need to know programming. So either database management or algorithm development or even just optimizing of the scripts. The third one being bioinformatic analysis, that is analytical part, wherein you do data mining or you do protein structure modeling or any other type of sequential analysis. And the fourth one being statistics, because every kind of downstream analysis that you do needs to have a statistical base to it. It's all about probability in bioinformatics, right? Everything we build on a hypothesis, everything is tested out on a hypothesis. That is why every time you test out a hypothesis, it needs to be validated in a wet lab technique. So you need to have your statistics really strong. So you need to figure out what skill sets you want to pick up from this entire triangle and what skill sets are going to help you for your future. And lastly, bioinformatics during the pandemic. Now, speaking from personal experience, I know the entire pandemic has been horrible to everybody, even from a job or career point of view. But the one thing that has given us a upper hand is, like I said, we can work remotely. Secondly, even if no data is generated, you have public data sets that you can analyze, you have and try to find something novel in them. If not that, a lot of hospitals and clinics are adopting the paperless techniques now, wherein they're trying to build a database of patients and upload all their results on the database rather than asking the patients physically to come and collect their reports. So even a clinic management system can be generated. You can approach different clinics and say, just offer them to build a cheap, small clinic management system for them if you have good knowledge of database management. So even though there are a lot, there is still enough work that can be done remotely that can give rise to different opportunities and different fields of employment for bioinformaticians. So I think that is it for the workshop. I'm sorry, I think they are just burning something. So I had an allergic reaction to the entire thing. So I started coughing midway. But I hope I was able to convey all the points that I wanted to put forth. If anybody has any questions, please let me know.